In the bustling city of Seattle, where glass towers pierce the clouds and startup dreams fill the air, Michael Thompson sat in his corner office staring at his computer screen. As the CEO of a rising tech company, he built his success through calculated decisions and strategic planning. But today, he was fixated on something different: a viral video of a young black software developer who'd created an innovative app in his garage. The developer's creation was exactly what Michael's company needed: a breakthrough solution that could revolutionize their user experience. His fingers drummed against his mahogany desk as he watched the video for the fifth time. The young man's talent was undeniable, but Michael saw something else: an opportunity to acquire brilliant work at a fraction of its worth. "Schedule a meeting," he told his assistant, already rehearsing his pitch. He'd offered just enough to seem generous to someone from a modest background, but nowhere near the true value of the technology. It was business, he told himself, just another deal in a city full of deals. What Michael didn't expect was to meet someone who would change not just his perspective, but his entire approach to business and life. The young developer walked into his office a week later, dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt, carrying nothing but a laptop and an unwavering sense of self-worth. Their conversation started professionally enough, but as Michael began to lay out his carefully crafted lowball offer, something unexpected happened. The developer didn't just counter with numbers. He shared stories of his grandmother who taught him coding on a second-hand computer, stories of neighborhood kids he now mentored in STEM, stories that painted pictures of community, purpose, and the true value of innovation. As Michael listened, something shifted in the air-conditioned office. The spreadsheets and profit margins that had always guided his decisions began to feel strangely hollow. He found himself remembering his own grandfather, a small business owner who taught him about integrity in business, lessons he'd somehow forgotten in his rush to the top. The meeting ran over by 2 hours, their discussion evolving from a simple business transaction into a deeper conversation about purpose, ethics, and the responsibility of success. The young developer spoke with passion about creating technology that could lift entire communities, not just individual bank accounts. By the end of that afternoon, Michael sat quietly at his desk, the setting sun casting long shadows across his office. The contract in front of him looked nothing like his original plan. Instead of exploitation, it outlined a partnership. Instead of a quick profit, it promised sustainable growth and community impact. But as he reached for his pen, doubts crept in. His board wouldn't understand. The shareholders would question his judgment. Years of business instincts screamed at him to stick to the original plan. After all, isn't this how the game was played? Isn't this how he built his success? Yet something had fundamentally changed. The young developer's words echoed in his mind. True innovation isn't just about creating new technology. It's about creating new ways of thinking. Looking out over the city skyline, Michael knew he stood at a crossroads. The decision he would make next wouldn't just affect quarterly reports or stock prices. It would define what kind of leader, what kind of person he chose to be. What happened next would challenge everything Michael thought he knew about business, success, and the true meaning of value. But that's where our story really begins. The next morning, Michael arrived at his office earlier than usual. The weight of his pending decision felt heavier than the leather briefcase in his hand. As he waited for his coffee to brew, he scrolled through old photos on his phone, pictures of himself at community service events, cutting ribbons at charity functions, always smiling for the cameras. But now those images felt hollow, like props in a play he'd been performing for years. His assistant poked her head in, reminding him of the board meeting in an hour. Michael nodded, his mind drifting back to yesterday's conversation. The young developer hadn't just pitched technology. He'd shared a vision of tech companies working hand in hand with communities, creating solutions that served everyone, not just shareholders. The idea was revolutionary, yet somehow felt like common sense. The board meeting started like any other, with graphs showing upward trends and presentations full of corporate jargon. But when Michael stood to present his proposal for the partnership, the room's atmosphere shifted. He described a collaboration that would not only advance their technology, but also establish coding workshops in underserved neighborhoods. The developer's app would be just the beginning. Together, they'd create a pipeline of diverse talent and innovative solutions. The silence that followed his presentation was deafening. Board members exchanged glances, some puzzled, others clearly disapproving. "This isn't what we discussed, Michael," one senior board member finally spoke. "The original plan was to acquire the technology at market value. This is something else entirely." Michael felt sweat forming on his forehead, but his voice remained steady. He shared what he'd learned about the developer's community work, the impact of his mentorship programs, and the potential for long-term growth through ethical business practices. But with each word, he could see the skepticism growing on their faces. During the lunch break, Michael retreated to his office, his mind racing. The board's resistance wasn't surprising. He'd been just like them yesterday morning. But now, standing at his window overlooking the city, he saw more than just buildings and profit margins. He saw communities, potential, and the possibility of doing business differently. His phone buzzed with a message from the developer, sharing excited ideas about their potential collaboration. The enthusiasm was contagious, but Michael's stomach tightened as he thought about the board's reaction. He hadn't mentioned their response yet. As he prepared to return to the afternoon session, Michael's secretary handed him a stack of papers, market research about similar community-focused tech initiatives. The numbers told an interesting story. Companies that invested in community development and ethical practices often saw slower initial growth, but stronger long-term sustainability and loyalty. Walking back into the boardroom, Michael could feel the tension. The afternoon agenda was packed, but everyone knew the real discussion wasn't about quarterly reports or market projections. It was about what kind of company they wanted to be. Just as the meeting was about to resume, Michael's phone lit up with another message. This time, it was a video. The developer was at his community center, surrounded by eager young faces learning to code. The joy and potential in their eyes made the sterile boardroom feel suddenly foreign. Michael stood up, ready to fight for his vision, but before he could speak, the boardroom door opened. An unexpected visitor walked in, someone whose presence would change the entire dynamic of the discussion. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of this partnership, but the very soul of the company. Through the boardroom door walked Sarah Chin, the company's largest investor and a notoriously tough businesswoman. Her unexpected presence made the air feel even thicker. Michael had worked with her for years, but they'd often clashed over the company's direction. Sarah was known for prioritizing rapid growth over everything else. Everyone watched as she took a seat at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable. "I heard there was an interesting discussion happening today," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Something about changing our entire business approach." The way she emphasized entire made Michael's throat tighten. But before Michael could respond, Sarah pulled out her tablet and began to speak. She talked about her own father, a small business owner who lost everything in the 90s when a large corporation bought out his patent for a fraction of its worth. The room stayed silent, uncertain where she was going with this story. Then she turned to face Michael directly. "You know what happened to that corporation?" she asked, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone lean forward. "They're gone now, collapsed under the weight of their own short-term thinking. But the companies that survived, that thrived, they're the ones that understood something fundamental about business in the modern world." Michael's heart raced as Sarah paused, scrolling through something on her tablet. The developer's latest message notification flashed on Michael's phone, more eager ideas about their potential partnership. The contrast between the hopeful messages and the tense boardroom felt almost surreal. Sarah suddenly projected a series of graphs onto the wall. They showed long-term performance data for companies with different business approaches. "I've been watching similar initiatives across the tech sector," she continued, "and I've noticed a pattern that's impossible to ignore." The board members shifted in their seats, their eyes moving between the graphs, Sarah, and Michael. The data showed something unexpected, but before Sarah could elaborate, another interruption came, this time from the company's HR director, who burst in with urgent news about their latest talent retention numbers. The timing couldn't have been more relevant. Their top performers were leaving, citing company culture and ethical concerns as primary reasons. Young talent was choosing smaller companies with stronger community connections over higher salaries at firms like theirs. As this information settled over the room, Michael stood up. He looked at each board member in turn, seeing the conflict in their eyes. They all understood they were standing at a pivotal moment, not just for this deal, but for the company's entire future. The developer's next message came with a video, this time showing a local news segment about his community work. The sound of young voices learning to code filled the boardroom before Michael could silence his phone. But instead of looking annoyed, Sarah's expression changed ever so slightly. "Play it," she said, her voice carrying an authority that no one dared question. As the video played, showing the real impact of the developer's work, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. But then came the crucial question from the most skeptical board member. "This all sounds noble, but what about our responsibility to shareholders? To profit?" Michael took a deep breath. He knew his next words would either bridge the gap between old thinking and new possibilities or destroy everything he'd been fighting for. The developer's vision, Sarah's unexpected presence, the HR data, and years of business instinct all converged in his mind as he opened his mouth to respond. Just then, another figure appeared at the door, someone whose presence would force everyone in that room to confront their own assumptions about business, success, and the true meaning of value. Standing in the doorway was David Richardson, Michael's mentor and the company's founding CEO. Now in his 70s, David rarely made appearances at board meetings since his retirement 5 years ago. His presence commanded immediate attention, his silver hair and weathered face carrying the wisdom of decades in the industry. "I've been watching," David said, walking slowly to the center of the room. "Not just today's meeting, but our company's journey over the years." He pulled out an old, worn leather portfolio, the same one he carried when he started the company 30 years ago. The room fell into a deeper silence as David opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed papers and old photographs. "You see this?" he asked, holding up a faded picture. It showed a young David standing in front of a small garage office, surrounded by a diverse group of people. "These were our first employees, not chosen for their prestigious degrees or their connections, but for their passion, their drive, and their different perspectives." As David spoke, Michael's phone lit up again. This time, it was a message he couldn't ignore. The developer had just been approached by their biggest competitor with an offer that would be hard to refuse. The pressure in the room became almost unbearable. Sarah Chen leaned forward, her expression shifting from stern to curious. "David," she said, "times have changed. The market is different now." But before she could continue, David raised his hand, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of wisdom and challenge. "Have they really changed, Sarah?" he asked, pulling out another document from his portfolio. This was our original mission statement. Not the polished version on our website, but the real one we wrote in that garage. He began to read words that made several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Just then, the HR director's tablet pinged with an urgent notification. Their top competitors were already implementing similar community-focused initiatives, gaining significant attention from both talent pools and consumers. The market was shifting beneath their feet while they sat in debate. Michael stood up, ready to make his final plea, but David's next words stopped him short. "Before you speak, Michael," he said, "there's something else you all need to know." He pulled out one final document from his portfolio, its contents hidden but clearly significant from the way his hands trembled slightly. The developer's latest message flashed on the screen, a simple text that would completely transform the stakes of their decision. Outside the boardroom windows, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the faces of everyone present. Each person in that room knew they were part of a moment that would be remembered, one way or another, in the company's history. Sarah Chen's tablet displayed real-time market data showing an unexpected trend in consumer behavior. David's mysterious document lay unopened on the table. The developer's message blinked insistently on Michael's phone, and somewhere in the building, a press release was being prepared, though its contents would depend entirely on what happened in the next few moments. As Michael looked around the room, he saw the conflict written on every face. This wasn't just about one deal anymore. It was about legacy, about the future, about what it truly means to lead in a changing world. And as David finally began to open that last document, the room held its breath, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. David's hand steadied as he finally revealed the document. It was a newspaper article from 25 years ago. The headline read, "Tech Giants' Predatory Practices Leave Local Innovators Bankrupt." The article detailed how their own company, in its early days, had faced a moral crossroads similar to this one, but had chosen profit over people. The decision had haunted David ever since. "We survived that choice," David said, his voice heavy with emotion, "but we lost something more valuable than money. We lost our soul." He turned to Sarah Chen, whose usual confident demeanor had softened. "Sarah, your father's story. That company that bought his patent. It was us." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the article, her eyes scanning the words that connected her personal history to this very moment. Michael watched as tears formed in her eyes, decades of business philosophy crumbling in an instant. Just then, Michael's phone buzzed one final time. The developer had sent a complete proposal, not just for the app, but for a revolutionary business model that would transform how tech companies interact with communities. The message included something unexpected. He'd already turned down the competitor's higher offer, believing in the potential of what they could build together. Sarah stood up, her voice steady despite her tears. "My father never recovered from losing his business," she said, "but he taught me something I've forgotten until today. Success isn't just measured in dollars." She turned to Michael, a new determination in her eyes. "I want to invest more, not just in this partnership, but in rebuilding our entire approach." The board members watched in stunned silence as Sarah Chen, their toughest critic, became their strongest advocate. But the real surprise came from David. He pulled out one last item from his portfolio. A check, written 25 years ago, meant to compensate Sarah's father fairly. "I never had the courage to send it," he admitted, "but today we have the chance to right that wrong and create something better." Michael looked around the room, seeing the transformation on every face. The HR director was already drafting new policies for community engagement. Board members were excitedly discussing potential expansions of the developer's programs. But then came the moment's final twist. The developer himself appeared in the doorway, having arrived early for their follow-up meeting. He stood there, taking in the scene. The emotional board members, the scattered documents, Sarah wiping away tears, and David's weathered smile. But instead of a laptop, he carried something unexpected, a framed photograph of his own grandfather, who, as it turned out, had worked alongside David in that very garage 30 years ago. "I guess everything comes full circle," the developer said, walking into the room. "My grandfather always told me about a company that started with a vision of changing the world. He believed that vision could still come true." As Michael watched the developer and David embrace, as Sarah began drafting a new mission statement, as the board members eagerly planned their community initiatives, he realized something profound. Sometimes the biggest business innovations don't come from technology at all. They come from rediscovering our humanity. The room buzzed with renewed purpose, but Michael's moment of triumph was interrupted by an unexpected question from the developer. "So, are you ready to hear the real reason I created this app?" His words promised one final revelation that would transform not just their company, but the entire tech industry's approach to innovation and community. The developer sat down at the boardroom table, his grandfather's photograph placed carefully beside David's old portfolio. This app wasn't just about creating innovative technology, he began, his voice filled with purpose. It was about proving that success and social responsibility aren't opposites, they're partners. My grandfather taught me that before he passed away. As he explained, the app had been deliberately designed to require community involvement to reach its full potential. Its most powerful features would only activate when used in educational settings, when shared with learning communities, when contributing to collective growth. It was brilliantly simple yet revolutionary, technology that became more valuable the more it helped others. Michael watched as understanding dawned on every face in the room. Sarah Chen was already making calls to her investment network, spreading the word about this new approach to tech development. David sat back in his chair, a peaceful smile on his face, as if witnessing the completion of a journey he'd started 3 decades ago. The board meeting transformed into an impromptu planning session. By sunset, they had outlined a new company division focused on community-driven innovation, with the developer leading the initiative. Sarah Chen had committed to creating a fund specifically for identifying and supporting diverse tech talent in underserved communities. The HR director was overjoyed, noting how this would revolutionize their recruitment and retention. 1 month later, Michael stood on a small stage in the community center where it all began. The room was packed with young aspiring developers, local business owners, and families. As he helped cut the ribbon for their first tech education hub, he caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, the skeptical board member who had questioned their responsibility to shareholders. She was now teaching a coding class to elementary school students. The company's stock had actually risen since announcing their new direction, attracting a different kind of investor, those looking for sustainable, community-minded growth. Other tech companies were beginning to follow their lead, creating a ripple effect throughout the industry. David and the developer's grandfather had been right all along. True innovation wasn't just about creating new technology, but about creating new ways of thinking about success itself. The app had become a symbol of this philosophy, its usage spreading across communities nationwide, each new user adding to its value and impact. As Michael finished his speech that evening, he shared one final surprise. The company was establishing a scholarship fund in honor of Sarah's father and the developer's grandfather, ensuring that their stories would inspire future generations of ethical innovation. Looking out at the crowd of bright, eager faces, Michael realized that their story wasn't really about a CEO learning to be less exploitative. It was about rediscovering what business could be when guided by humanity rather than just profit. The real innovation wasn't in the technology they created, but in remembering that the greatest value comes from lifting others up. The developer stepped up to the microphone next, his grandfather's photograph now hanging proudly on the community center wall alongside David's original mission statement. As he began to share his vision for the future, Michael saw Sarah Chen in the back of the room, already taking notes about their next community initiative. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. A moment of listening instead of exploiting, of connecting instead of competing, of remembering that true success isn't about what we gain, but about what we give back. In the end, it wasn't just kindness that changed everything. It was the courage to believe in a different way of doing business, one human connection at a time.